Takshila, India. Maria Espinosa, Executive Director, GWL Voices, Spain. Nagesh Kumar, Director, Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, India. Benjamin Kishore, Lee Ka-shing Professor, Public Management and Director, Institute for Environment and Sustainability, Singapore. To be moderated by Jaibal Naduwat, Vice President and Senior Fellow, Observer Research Foundation. Over to you, Jaibal.
Good afternoon and welcome to this last panel. And it's a very fascinating panel because we have got the demographic we are discussing right here in this room. And there is, of course, a lot of interest. A lot of people have said they have a lot of questions. So obviously, we're going to discuss and get on to those questions as well. So, you know, the G20 presents a very interesting study in contrasts. Some nations have an aging population, and on the other hand, the other nations have a very young population. Latin America, for example, Ecuador, for example, or India, you know, a lot of. So, and the twain shall have to meet to effect the critical development outcomes, the SDG goals. What is the pathway to that? So let me begin with you, Nagesh.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be on the panel. I wanted to actually talk about a little bit connecting with the digital public infrastructure and IR 4.0, which means different things to different people. I think number of effects that are coming of that AI. You know, one thing which is talked about is that very sort of broad and sweeping applications of these technologies to different fields, agriculture, industry, services, some of which are helping to improve efficiency, competitiveness, and all that. But they are also, like any other technology revolution, disruptive consequences or creative destruction, if you like, Schumpeterian terminology. What are those? Those are about the impact on the world of work, different kinds of work. For instance, we talk about gig economy workers, and they will be dominating the scene. But a lot of jobs going off the market. So a lot of disruptions in the labor market, in the sense that up to 69% of jobs may disappear. I mean, these are kind of estimates or projections different people are making. But I like one analysis done by McKinsey recently, which shows that AI and machine learning and all of these new technologies will displace some 18% of the workers, but they will also create 17% of new jobs. So in net terms, the impact on employment is only 1%, but think of those 18% who will lose the jobs. So what it means for the policymakers. Policymakers have to create some systems which will take care of these 18% which will go out of jobs. So new types of social protection, taking care of these people. Then people who will get into new jobs, some of them are gig workers, gig economy workers, which are not regular employees, they are partners, vendors and all that. So different kind of social protection system for covering for them. And creating new skills, reskilling of the workforce for the new type of jobs, AI, machine learning included. And for countries which you hinted at, moderator, the countries which are having youthful population or demographic dividend, they have this real opportunity to create a new type of workforce which will be trained, which is trained in AI and machine learning, and workforce fit for purpose for the new economy, new digital economy, if you like, and while not overlooking those who will go out of the jobs. And so creating social protection system for them. Some of them can be redeployed, reskilled, and put into some other kinds of jobs. But I think for countries like India, Africa, you know, which have youthful workforce, and compared to aging societies in East Asia and Europe, I think these are the countries which could be the skill capitals or talent capitals of future if they can make their education system fit for purpose. So rebalancing in favor of STEM, the technology, engineering, mathematics kind of education. Within STEM also, rebalancing in favor of AI and machine learning, for instance. There is going to be a huge need for coding people, you know, and they are not available in the kind of numbers they are required. So I think this, demographic transition, some countries becoming aging societies, and others still having youthful populations like India, other countries of South Asia and Africa, they have the great opportunity to transform their education systems and create the workforce of the type that will be needed, and feed the jobs around the world, because these services can be delivered from your homes, and that is another transition. Maybe I could come back.
I think absolutely, Nagesh. I mean, we are expecting to have 25% of the global workforce in India in the next few years, and that these are very important conversations that we need to have. So, Maria, how can the G20 collaborate to affect those important outcomes?
Well, first of all, allow me, since we are the very last panel today, that this has been 3 days of amazing collective intelligence, and I'm a poet, and I've been writing down how many times words are repeated. This shouldn't count with my time, but I think it's a worthwhile, perhaps, reflection. And the word that has come up the most is crisis. Crisis, crisis, mega crisis, polycrisis, permacrisis. And just to say that this should not be our manifest destiny. This should not be, crisis mode should not be, our modus vivendi, our new normal. And and these are all human-made crises, therefore we have to find, and we have, human-made solutions. And that leads me to your question, is that, now our human family has 8+ billion people around the world, and this should be good news for us. Why good news? Because it means that health, education, science, medicine are working well, and that people are living longer lives, and most are living healthier lives. So all this should be good news, but unfortunately, it has been perceived with anxiety and concern instead. Great anxiety, what we call demographic anxiety. And of course, I think that 8+ billion people in the midst of a ecological footprint crisis, which is beyond climate. We concentrated a lot in talking about climate, but it goes beyond that. The water cycle climate, the crisis, the biodiversity extinction crisis, et cetera, mass displacement, conflict, shortages of food, cost of living increases, et cetera. So the future, of course, seems bleak, and globally, and that number really, attract my attention. 6 out of 7 people worldwide feel insecure. and they feel insecure because they are not sure what the future is going to look like for them and for their children and future generations. And of course, there are many valid, I would say, many valid pressing concerns related to population and population growth, such as, population size with inequalities, increasing energy, food, water consumptions, about education needs, reskilling, pension funds, for example, jobs, as you very well mentioned, not only for the younger population, but for women, because there's a huge gap in access to the labor force by women. And of course, all these problems, end with a women body. And what do I mean by that? Profound ecological crisis and footprint, have less children. Aging population, especially industrialized country, have more children. No, and we know that this engineering of demographics do not work, basically. And I think it is time for a new approach. And this new approach is approaching demographics that put humans and people at the center, that goes from demographic anxiety to demographic resilience, and the ability that we have to adapt to fluctuations in population growth, fertility rates. This has always happened during the humanities history. And of course, that means improving our mechanisms for scenario building, data collection. It means asking the right questions. And the right questions are how to guarantee that all humans have access to public goods, such as health, through universal health coverage, education, water and sanitation. We have said a lot that we need to reduce energy consumption. We haven't said, though, that more than 13% of the world population does not have access to electricity, which is above 900 million people. We haven't said that 40% of the world population do not have access to fuel for safe cooking, for example. And so redistribution is critical when we're talking about the energy transition. And then I think that we need the right scenario building, the right policies, the right investments in our economies, etc., and to harness the opportunities of demographic shifts. So basically, we have also mentioned the word transition many times, but I think that we are living times where transitions need to be urgent and now, which means transformations and revolutions. And among these, allow me just to mention three, and perhaps second round, I will say a little more. I would say one is the ecological footprint revolution. And that's, of course, energy transition, but also looking at the pollution, the extinction crisis, and the water cycle crisis. We will not fix climate if we do not fix the water climate crisis. Because, well, too little water, too much water, water that is too polluted. So water has to be brought into the equation. The number two is the future of work transition, and I won't go into the details because you outlined what are the critical issues. But here I would like also to make a call for the economy of the future, which is the care economy, and the urgent need to defeminize, professionalize work that is being undervalued and underpaid, that basically keep 80% of women occupied and busy, but unpaid or underpaid. And I said this is the economy of the future because childcare and aging population, and it has to be professionalized, even though I would call it the love and care transformation, because it's the only, perhaps, human activity that cannot be replaced by a robot or by sophisticated technologies. It's about love and care, and I think this should be also a revolution. The number 3 is what we heard yesterday, and I was deeply impressed with this life mission, which means a revolution in production and consumption. Means that in our supply chains, we will be able to track carbon, but also to track child labor and injustices in the labor market. So supply chains should be able to track everything and become responsibility supply chains in a way. And the 4th transformation, I would call it the global governance revolution, because we need the right institutions. We need the right multilateral scaffold to respond to a changing world, to respond to a world in crisis. And there, I mean all the international institutions, including the United Nations, including the G20 architecture, the G7, the BRICS, the international financial institutions. There is a lot of intellectual energy out there. And for the first time in my almost 30 years of engagement with the United Nations, believe me, I see that we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel in terms of a profound structural reform of the system under what is being called the Our Common Agenda report and the upcoming Summit of the Future in 2024. So I am a strong believer that global problems require a strong, inclusive, feminist, multilateral system. And perhaps I could add a little more in a second round. Thank you.
Benjamin, I think taking off from Maria, I think very uniquely situated to answer those 2 very important points, crisis and anxiety. Yeah? The climate crisis and climate anxiety. How can the G20 collaborate? How can the G20 engage better with each other to address this issue among the youth? And how do we have the youth to inspire us?
Thank you. And let me say that's a very important question, because how we think about these demographic transitions and the sustainability transitions are completely intertwined. And how we address them, therefore, is fundamental to the questions for this panel and for this conference and the planet. Before I begin some specifics, I did want to give 2 contextual factors to my reflections. The first is that I am located at the National University of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, which is delving and doing research carefully on the questions about aging and demographic transitions. Whereas Singapore addresses and faces an aging population, its neighboring countries are quite young. And so we have in Southeast Asia, in the Singapore context, a dynamic reflecting this panel that reflects the broader North and South challenges. How do we both manage for aging populations as well as the dynamism of a younger population? The second context is that I am director of our new Institute for Environment and Sustainability, which was established last year as a way to think about how do we manage these transitions towards a sustainable economy and sustainable society. And one thing that's clear from the G20, from the UN, and from almost every effort is that these transitions must be just. They must bring people along, and they must lift people out of poverty, and they must be empowering in some ways. So we have 2 questions then. We have 2 transitions. One is demographic, which is going to happen, and we are going to experience it. But the question is in what direction is still not preordained. The second is the decarbonization, sustainability transitions. And that's an imperative, but it's also not preordained. So how do we think about these linkages? And I want to make 2 points in this regard. The first is that we know that there will be incredible opportunities for new jobs in the green economy, from training around how to engage in carbon markets, to inventory analysis, to sustainable resources management. The list goes on. And that requires then proactively training the youth of today for tomorrow's jobs in a way that gets those who know what's going to happen in the future directly in contact with those who are training our young in ways that can help create that youth dividend that we talk about, but again, which is not preordained. And then secondly, we know that there's been a talk about how the green economy can do wonderful things, and I've never seen so much attention on this question now in the world and in the G20 and reflecting the discussions of the last few days, that we can build a green market economy that can, if designed well, lead to these kinds of important transitions that bring people along and address these crises that we're facing. But what I want to say is, and note, that we've been here before. The Rio Plus 20 conference was all around the green economy and just transitions. We know that the Bali COP meeting on financing and deforestation was around lifting people up through economic development and conservation. We know that this has happened for quite some time. So how do we take this opportunity now and learn from the mistakes of the past and actually this time get it right, both for the youth, for demographic transitions, and also for the environment? I want to make two arguments, okay? The first point I want to make is that we have to move from metaphors that are nice sounding to the actual tricky task of policy design. Policy design can do really amazing things if done well, but the nitty-gritty of design can also lead to unfortunate outcomes if we don't think and anticipate the future very well. This is a task that all of us can be engaged in, but I want to raise two design questions for us all, thinking about the G20 in that context. The first is, there are, in fact, now northern green economy initiatives. The EU's Green New Deal, the US Inflation Reduction Act are showing that people and governments will invest billions and trillions of dollars into green economy infrastructure and the training and subsidies for this new world. But the critique is that they're going to act as protectionist interventions that may undermine the global south, as we heard from these panels the last couple of days. So how do we then design these efforts to actually reflect the potential to improve, not undermine, efforts in the global south? Do we focus on cross-border adjustment mechanisms? We've heard so much talk about that as being perhaps undermining the global south in some way. Even the EU's no deforestation regulation right now, while well-intended, may end up simply undermining economic development in the global south. How do we reverse those around policy design? And what I want to actually ask in my final concluding thoughts is, do we need a Green New Deal for the planet that isn't just a EU or US Green New Deal, but one that thinks about a Green New Deal for the youth in the global south, to bring them along in a way that can actually create prosperity and sustainable development? And this means, I think, then we have to go from beyond simply domestic Green New Deals and then sticks when it comes to global efforts, carbon border adjustment mechanisms, no deforestation regulations, and instead think about carrots. How do we give preferences to green products that are produced in the south and give them access to the northern lucrative markets? How do we do that in ways that therefore target green finance and a green industrial plan? This requires, of course, a lot of work on capacity building and into policy design, but I think if we do it well, and there's an opportunity to do so in the G20 as a way to generate new global collaborations around common purpose, it's possible, but it's not preordained. And I hope that here and in this meeting, we can kickstart a more targeted effort to link these two transitions.
Shambhavi, as we look at the subject under discussion, health is a very, very critical subject. And how do we address the health-related challenges with the changing demographics, and what could be those one or two critical areas which you think the G20 could focus on?
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for inviting me to a very interesting topic. Made me reflect after quite a few days on why and how we can look at health. So I want to outline the challenges first, and I think there are three major challenges when it comes to health in changing demographics. And the first is that we can't look at health in silo. There are going to be massive world events that are going to occur in addition to increasing the world's population. I think the first thing that we have to address is capacity. Obviously, if there are more people, we need more healthcare. And we need equitable healthcare at that. So how do we actually go about doing this? Second is specialized healthcare. So when you think of there are more young people, there's also going to be more young people with more purchasing power to indulge themselves, probably leading sedentary lives, doing machine learning and AI, which means there are going to be more lifestyle diseases that we need to now cater to. There are going to be more older people, which who are also likely going to be living lonelier lives because we are moving to more and more nuclear societies, which means there are going to be mental health issues, as well as more geriatric issues by people living longer than we have done before. And then third, unless we rein in climate change, which looks a little unlikely at this point of time, we are going to see massive migration, and not just of humans, of other species as well, putting more human and other species in conflict, which means there's going to be a probability of more zoonotic diseases, and likely another pandemic, which I hope not, but we have to be attuned to the fact that this could happen, right? So this is in terms of capacity. The second challenge is in the scope of healthcare services that we offer, and the nature of those might change. Everyone's wearing wearables these days. There is CGM, people are looking at glucose levels, heart rate, BP. The more we understand how these impact health, the more likely we are going to go in for preventive or counseling kind of therapies to change our lifestyle depending on, hey, why is my heart rate not gone down for the past 10 minutes? Rather than saying that, hey, something is wrong, I'm having a chest pain, let me go and see the doctor, right? So we're going to be moving to a more preventive sort of healthcare service. And the other is obviously more precision or personalized therapies, as again, we understand much better about individual human health. So that's the second challenge, which is about the scope of healthcare services. And the third, and I think the most important, is that we are going to redefine what health is, right? If I ask this room, I think most people will agree that you are healthy. You're in this room, that you are healthy individuals, right? But I also see a lot of people wearing spectacles. That is covering a major disability. I'm sure some of you cannot go about doing daily functions without your glasses, right? But are you unhealthy? No. And the more you think about augmentation, right, prosthetics, gene editing for enhancements, what is healthy? What is going to be the new normal? Where do we draw a line? That, I think, is the most exciting policy challenge for us in the future. And I think in terms of recommendations, two main. One is an understanding of shared ethics, right? Where do we draw this line? What should be allowed? What should not be allowed? What is going to be a slippery slope? And the other is, again, not looking at health in a silo. So this might be a little contentious. Everyone has spoken about social protection and creating more employment, but increasing the retirement age, because that is going to have huge implications on mental health of people. So I think as a consensus, we can look at some of these topics.
Nagesh, 53% of our population is below 30. In India, we have around 1,000 universities, some 45,000 colleges, and 12,000 odd institutions of higher learning. But yet, the question remains of employability. How do we ensure that those who secure the right of passage also secure the right of entry into industry? What do we do?
Yeah, I think, one is a quality of education, which links with the employability. But I was, I'm getting very much concerned about the mismatch between the kind of skills we are producing and the skills that are needed increasingly in future as we go into, this new technology-driven industry 4.0. So, a lot of our IITs, for instance, have 100 seats in civil engineering, 100 in mechanical engineering, 100 in computing, and electrical and all that, all different disciplines, equal number of seats. Now, you need to reconfigure and re-engineer these seats, because there is going to be a much bigger demand for artificial intelligence and machine learning trained people compared to the traditional disciplines of civil engineering and mechanical. So reduce seats in those branches and increase in the branches where there will be huge demand, not for India alone, but India and other younger population countries will need to cater for the rest of the world, because many countries are passing through demographic transition of aging societies. So this is, I think, the big challenge of reconfiguring the education system, making it fit for purpose for the future. We still carry or inherited, the sort of educational structure from the past. It has to be really thought about again.
So a quick round before we go to the students and the audience. Shambhavi, in India, 43% of our graduates are in STEM, but barely 43% of our women graduates are in STEM, of which just 14% actually find employment, and that's a huge skew, you know. And how do we, where is that coming from? Because that concerns the youth, and that concerns, and probably some other social issues. So how do we address that skew?
Right, thanks, Evan. I think Maria's addressed some of these concerns before. Let me just encapsulate that into one line. The opportunity cost for a woman to be in STEM is much, much higher than a man, and this is probably true of other fields as well. So in my previous life, before I went into public policy, my PhD is in cancer biology. I spent 10 years trying to kill cancer cells in a petri dish. And so the caveat for what I'm going to say is that it is applicable to mostly from my experiences in the life sciences, not general STEM, right? The social cost of being a woman in India is huge. You know, it is not just childcare, it is elderly care, it is drawing rangolis at a festival, right? It is not just maternity. And we don't take that into account in our pay models or benefit models. The other is to carry on culture, right? The third is childcare, which as a mother to a 17-month-old, I can attest, it is not just a time that it draws on you, right? The cost on your brain is huge when you are a mother. So one of the recommendations that we have always given is that if you want to see more women back in STEM, bring in paternity leave. Let the men take care of the child. Right.
Right. Thank you, Shambhavi. Maria, Ecuador is a very interesting example. Ecuador is a very interesting example. Even in Latin America, the median age is less than the rest of the country. And I'm seeing that in the last 2 decades, there's so much of youth-related programs, even constitutionally, and even ratification of global treaties. And there's a lot of action on the ground. Why the last 2 decades, and what's the trigger? What's the new thinking? And how can the larger world benefit from that thinking and knowledge?
Well, I said that we need to go from demographic anxiety to building demographic resilient societies, and that requires a lot of intelligence, of good data, of policy and scenario designs. And someone said that the history of humanity is the history of war, religion, and migration, no? And sometimes we see migration as forced, as painful. That's the type of migration that we have. And migration should be by choice, and should be a way to rebalance demographics, and should be the way to share knowledge and experience, and to share culture and diversity as well. As we speak, there is a huge crisis in the border between Mexico and the United States of people wanting to cross the border in a forced way. Why? Because we have, first of all, you are so right, we will have the very humble numbers say that by 2050 we will have more than 1 billion people displaced by climate-related disasters, people displaced by conflict, and what I call the poverty refugees. We don't want our youth to become poverty refugees in other countries. In here, I would like to go to the relationship between demographic growth and economic growth. I've heard the word growth several times these days, and we have to understand that growth by itself is not an equalizer. Not at all. And we have seen countries growing a fast pace by widening their inequality gaps. And that is something that requires affirmative action policy, redistribution, fighting the culture of privilege that most of our societies have. I'm ashamed to say, by the most unequal region in the world is Latin America. So I think that while we grow, we need also to grow in affirmative action, in pro-poor, pro-equality policies, action, and investment. And that includes making sure that young people, that women that have the skills, have access to the job market. And that care work really goes under re-engineering. We cannot re-engineer the demographics of the world, but we can re-engineer the policies, the pro-equality, pro-decarbonization, pro-ecological sustainability.
Yeah. So, Benjamin, a very quick response from you. Singapore, you represent a very interesting side of the spectrum, because Singapore has got an aging population, but Singapore is doing some fantastic stuff both for the aging as well as the young. I mean, they have a policy which actively engages with the young to actually design future policy.
Yeah, I mean, Singapore is active on both fronts. So in the aging story, they're actually conducting research right now, including at our school, about how to best manage an aging population, from healthcare to pensions to even the role of technology in facilitating health-related benefits. But likewise, they're engaging the youth in a number of fronts around jobs for the new economy in the new future. And they're actively identifying then jobs that will exist in 10 years, and they're training for them right now by taking a proactive orientation. So some good lessons there. I did want to come in on this question about STEM, if I could, for one moment, because of course STEM is very important. My kids are all in STEM. I was a social scientist, and I think we have to recognize that all skills are important. We talk about policy design of 3 capacities: analytical, managerial, and technical. The technical are the STEM. Without the managerial and the analytical, we're not going to be able to make these transitions happen. And I'll tell you, I spent 18 years at Yale's environment school before I came to the Lee Kuan Yew School. In both those places, women dominate the graduate programs there. And they're outstanding, and they're going to become the leaders of tomorrow on the managerial and analytical side. So don't just say we need STEM. Think about gender issues across all 3 capacities.
So now we quickly open the floor for questions. Please raise your hands. We take a couple of questions. Yeah, please. So we'll just accumulate the questions. We just got 3 minutes on the clock, so we'll just quickly accumulate the questions and try to answer them. So we'll end on time. Yeah. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meenakshi Bhatt from the Department of Civics and Politics, University of Mumbai. My question is, how can the G20 engage to address cultural and societal barriers to gender equality in the workplace? And what specific initiatives and policies could be implemented to promote more equitable employment opportunities for the women?
Which panelists are you? Maria, maybe you can go for it.
Well, yes, I think that gender equality is about fighting cultural forms of discrimination, denaturalizing that. When we talk about gender equality, it really implies a cultural shift, a cultural and a mindset shift. And it very much comes from education, and from educating not only girls but also boys since very early ages. But it comes also with affirmative action policies, and with something that I didn't believe in the past, but I strongly believe now. It's a quota system. It's a quota system, and really making sure that women do not only have to access to the labor market and the job market, but they have the positions that they deserve and that they need to earn by merit. And that needs to happen too. It's not just access, but it's quality, it's leadership, it's acknowledgement, and reduce the pay gap that continues to exist. 22% pay gap. You know, women earn less than men with equal qualifications and merit.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shaurya Gori from Symbiosis School of International Studies. So my question is that comparative trade advantage is something that developing countries enjoy due to the population dividend. But as we are moving towards industrialization 4.0 and the fast-paced nature of technologies that are emerging, governments are unable to skill people to that pace. So how are developing countries going to cope up with this?
Well, actually, Shaurya, the thing is that currently the way the global value chains are structured, they are producing certain things in developing countries to take advantage of cheaper labor. But with AI, that advantage will erode, and so all the global value chains are going to be reconfigured, reshored back to the countries where that is consumed, because labor cost advantage will no more be an issue in determining the location of production. So there is an economist, Richard Baldwin, based in Geneva. He has been saying that trade will, the merchandise trade will become non-tradable, services will become tradable, because services can be delivered from wherever you are, the remote work and all that. So I think in future we need to be prepared for a society where we focus on some of these work processes delivered from the countries where there is this demographic dividend happening, countries like India, Africa in future. But for that we need to prepare our populations accordingly.
So, thank you. We are unfortunately completely out of time. I wish we could take a lot of these conversations outside and you could ask your questions to them. So I want to thank all the panelists for your time and such an engaging discussion. So we could have a family photo in the front.